The Astros split a series in New York. JV has a solid debut, but the bullpen is leaking worse than my old Ford Ranger. And speaking of Rangers, Texas is taking care of business, pushes their division lead back to 2.5. We'll talk about it next. Episode 35 of Stone Cold Stros starts right Welcome into Stone Cold Stros. I'm Brandon Strange, joined by senior content contributor Charlie Palillo. Follow him on Twitter at Palillo. Read his weekly column on sportsmat.com. Next to him is that guy, Josh Jordan. You know him. He's the editor of sportsmat.com. Follow him on Twitter at JoshJordan975. Be sure to hit like on this video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. The full version of this podcast is up in audio form right now at places like Apple and Spotify or Google Podcasts, wherever you get your pods. All those links are in the description. And when you're not watching or listening to Sports Map content, be sure to listen to our sister platform, ESPN 97.5, 92.5 on your radio dial. Charlie, it's episode 35. We kind of teased a little bit in our bonus episode, maybe some JV influences. Seems a little on the nose for you. So what do we got for episode 35 and player number 35?
Well, Justin Verlander is the obvious, but everyone knows all about Justin Verlander. So I'll mention the second greatest number 35 ever to pitch for the Astros, a guy named Mike Cuellar, a lefty who threw one of the great screwballs ever and was one of the great Astros screw-ups ever, trading him to the Orioles. Not quite Joe Morgan level bad as trades go, but the Astros trade Cuellar to the Orioles. He immediately wins the Cy Young Award, wins 20-plus games each of his first 3 seasons, part of the Orioles rotation, 4 20-game winners in 1971. One of the absolute oops deals in Astros history, trading Mike Cuellar ostensibly for an over-the-hill outfielder named Kurt Blefary, who played one nondescript season here, and a minor leaguer who never pitched for the Astros.
Well, let me give a special shout out to number 35, Josh Fields, who was traded for Yordan Alvarez 7 years ago this month. Appreciate you, Josh. You went down a hero. Topic 1, let's get right into it. The offense, man, it's weird saying that there's an offensive struggle happening coming off of a series finale, which the Astros scored 9. But like we were talking about in the pre-show, it just seemed like the Astros were running into a team that's worse off than they are. The roster's thin right now. We just saw report Corey Julks was just optioned to AAA right before we hit record on this. And so I just want to ask you guys, as I'm watching this, I'm thinking of what you guys are thinking about here. Is this a matter of the roster just being thin? Is it just they don't have enough options? So you don't feel comfortable pinch hitting for Maldi in a close game in the 8th inning? Or how much is penciling in a guy named Yordan Alvarez in the 5 hole to where he only gets 3 at-bats in a game?
All right, a lot to unwrap here. Dusty does some stuff that's just plain dumb. And the whole Diaz-Maldonado thing, Alvarez presumably will no longer camp out in the 5 hole. But in the end, it's about player performance, right? A manager can only submarine his team tactically so much. And over the weekend against the Yankees, the Astros had 2 really good games, scoring 7 and 9 runs, and 2 really puny games in terms of offensive output. And they split the 4 games in the series. Well, the Astros lineup basically is functionally bipolar. Alex Bregman's a steaming mediocrity. Now, he would have aspired to that in the Bronx. 0 for 15 for the series, 4 for his last 35 going back 10 games. That's a 114 batting average. Bregman is closer to mediocre than great, and that's been the story now for 4 years. He's 29 years old. You have a hot month. Well, Jose Abreu had a hot month. It's about the body of your work. So the Astros lineup, if Bregman is the midpoint, he's okay. You have 4 really good guys. Altuve, Tucker, Alvarez, Chas McCormick. And then you have 4 guys who blow chunks. I mean, Jake Meyer's the game of his life Sunday, but overall, he's not good. Jeremy Pena, a crashing disappointment as a sophomore. He was overhyped in terms of what expectations were for many off the amazing postseason, but that was a hot 3 weeks, much more of a fluke than his 2 seasons as an everyday major leaguer, where he's not a good offensive player, and the defense has been a little spotty too. Then there's the aforementioned Abreu, who's back to being near the bottom of the trash barrel in terms of overall quality. And then there's Martin Maldonado, merely one of the worst offensive regulars in the history of Major League Baseball. So if you have 4 really good guys, 4 really bad guys, and 1 average guy, you run that through the whole data bank, and shouldn't you have a pretty average offense? And that is what the Astros are overall. There are a number of really, really, really bad teams. So the Astros were going to stay, 24th in OPS, 22nd in runs scored, wherever they were earlier this season. But the Astros are the middle of the pack offense. Once you get in the playoffs, it's about who's hot in a limited stretch, a la Pena last year. But the Astros no longer have a premium offense. That's just the lay of their land now.
No, Charlie hit on it. Average is right. OPS and slugging, they're 15th in both categories. So right on the money. And, we talk about Abreu and Bregman. I know Pena's getting killed recently, but I said this before the show started. As bad as Pena's been, he's got 5 hits in his last 7 games. Bregman and Abreu together have 4. That's how bad those guys have been over the last week. Abreu's turned back into one of the worst hitters in baseball. That there's no way around it. I mean, it's just been awful. He's 8th worst in OPS, 9th worst in slugging. It just, at some point, I think we have to say sometimes a slump or a skid eventually becomes a down season. It is August 7th, and he is still top 10, one of the worst hitters in baseball. I think we just have to hope that maybe he can get it together like Yuli did in the postseason, and he can make an impact for you there. But for right now, it's a lost season. I'm not going to say that he'll never get it back, but sometimes guys have down years, and clearly that's what's going on for Abreu.
Look, John Singleton is a human straw they're grasping at, right? Julks, his last hit feels like it was Easter weekend, but 0 for 36, 3 for 55. You get him out of the major leagues, but you don't have a worthwhile prospect to call up. Bly Madris had his audition. So John Singleton, who's crushed it at Sugarland, as he crushed it at AAA for Milwaukee, as he always crushed it in the minor leagues, he's just never shown an ability to hit a lick at the major league level. But if you're going to replace Abreu for a game or two, it's not like he can get really any worse. So they'll hope to run into a little something with Singleton, but expecting him to come up and be a quality producer. That's spitting into the wind and tugging on Superman's cape and grasping at straw.
Well, talking about Pena, 2 of those 5 hits were soft infield singles where he just happened to reach. And Charlie, if Singleton is a straw, then Michael Brantley is a fantasy from a fever dream. And so I wonder if this isn't, more of an indictment on Dusty, because he can't control who is performing and how they perform, but he can control the lineup. So when you have a guy, and look, this is going to sound like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, because we have said for a while, Jeremy Pena should be in the 2-hole. They put him in the 2-hole. It's not really helping. And so, again, they're going to keep moving him around, but isn't that part of it, is your manager putting you in the best situation possible, given what few pieces he has? Isn't it more glaring that Dusty's, penciling in these lineups so questionably, or are we just all overreacting because we've seen the Astros perform, miracles in weird situations and kind of overcome some of these awkward lineups, and we're just expecting Pena to become prime Pena from the postseason, or Yordan to become the 3-run walk-off guy? Is it just we're expecting too much out of these guys with too few resources?
Some of that, yes. There's a little bit of short-term nostalgia, most specifically with Pena. He doesn't belong in the 2 spot. I mean, qualitatively, for over 2 months, where he belongs is Sugarland. I mean, his OPS for the season is in the 660s. His on-base percentage is sub 300, so that they went, a million wins and 9 losses last year with him in the 2-hole, and 11-2 in the postseason. That was then, this is now. And then he had a couple of decent games with a couple of scratch hits and did come up with an extra base hit for the first time in over a month, right? These are just morsels, not meals. I mean, Bregman, for as lame, frankly, as he's been, he does take walks. So, the on-base percentage is still credible. It was their 111th game of the season on Friday night, and I thought it was the first time, given what he had, that Dusty Baker actually filled out just about their optimal lineup, where you had Altuve, Bregman on base guys, Alvarez back in the 3 spot, Tucker 4. He hit Yiner 5, Abreu 6, Chaz 7. Now, Chaz should probably be 5. Abreu push him down further. And then you had Pena and Myers at the bottom. That was a reasonable construct. But when half the guys in your order just are bad, there's only so much straw you can spin into gold. That's a lot of straw references. Too many of these guys are hitting like Miles Straw.
Yeah, I mean, I think the deal with Pena for me is, what are the other options? I think you just have to just grin and bear it. Dubon is worse than him right now. Dubon has a worse OPS. He's worse in slugging. So I think you have to deal with it. You hope Pena pulls out of it. I'm just the guys that you can make a difference with, the other guys that you can start more regularly. I'd like to see more concern about that with Abreu. We've harped on this all season long. Why does he have to play so much? He's an older player. Get him some rest. And then when you get him some rest with Verlander on the hill, you put Gray Kessinger at first base. So then you have Kessinger and Maldi and Dubon all in the lineup together. What chance did they have to score any runs? So, and I get it. He didn't want to play Yiner against lefties and all that kind of stuff, but the sample size isn't big enough. Sometimes you just got to play him if he's your best option.
Bullseye on that latter point from Josh there. For Dusty to die on the hill of, well, I checked the stats too, maybe better than you guys. Yiner's hitting 170 against lefties, 61 plate appearances. Early in the season, when a really good hitter struggles through 50, 75 at bats, until you get to 125, 150 at bats, don't read anything into anything. So Dusty's going to keep kicking Yiner in the head over 61. Yes, the numbers suck against left-handed pitching. Well, what about the more than 3,500 Martin Maldonado plate appearances that have proven beyond a shadow of a doubt he's one of the worst offensive regulars in the history of Major League Baseball? This season, against right-handed pitching, more than 200 plate appearances, Maldonado's OPS is below 500. Not just below 600, below 500. So to give Dusty the weakest benefit of the doubt on this, Yiner should be catching every game against right-handed pitching. And if you're going to play Molly because, Yiner can't hit lefties, 61 plate appearances, I've drawn my definitive conclusion. Well, then it should be a platoon spot where the vastly better player is going the majority of the time. And I've about had it. In Framber's no-hitter, it fed the fanboys and the dim bulbs that, Martin Maldonado, Framber Valdez. Where was Menza Maldi catching Yoda Sunday when the Astros were walking 12 guys? Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig are dead. Mix in a strike once in a while. Where was genius Maldi to settle things down and have Phil Maton rediscover at least a semblance of reaching into the strike zone with a pitch? The ERA is lower when Yiner catches. Throwing out opposing base stealers, you have a much better shot when Yiner is making the throw. The past ball numbers, it's absolutely preposterous that Maldonado continues to catch 70% of the games. And we are at the point, it is straight up myth that Maldi's defense and savvy behind the plate is just indispensable. Just the catching side of things before you even throw in the potency of Yiner's bat. 61 plate appearances. You're not going to start him against any lefties. That's just flat stupid, Dusty. Sorry.
Well, I couldn't say it any better myself, and I'm going to leave it at that because that's going to do it for part 1 of the podcast. To listen to the full podcast, it's up right now at your favorite podcast providers like Apple or Spotify. And to watch the full conversation right here on YouTube, make sure you go watch click on the Stone Cold Stros playlist. We'll be releasing all those videos very shortly. And as always, go Stros.